I'm really grateful for everybody who turned out today. This is more than I expected, to be frank. So I'm really thankful that all of you are here. I think that some of you are curious about why I want to be county executive, and probably some of you are wondering why anyone would want to be an elected official today. And I get that. Before I came here today, I was dealing with two things I did not want to deal with. One is there's a racist protest outside the county council building today from folks in the anti-immigrant community, and some of my friends who were going to be here up there in a counter demonstration against the clowns. And at the same time, some police officer chose to join a listserv or a Facebook discussion about the closing of Lake Forest Mall and make a comment to the effect that he and his friends are putting together lots of money. They're going to build an airstrip and they're going to carpet bomb the mall because those kinds of fill in the blank. And I'm just stunned because this kind of thing breaks down the kind of trust we have between the police and the community. If someone's talking about how you ought to be bombed, it's very hard to conceive about how that officer is going to look at it after your well-being and protect the community. So I kind of started that in the middle of my day today, and that's kind of frustrating. So we're in an altered political dynamic. It's not the way it was when I was growing up. It's just far worse and far more vicious in a lot of ways than even growing up in the 60s and certainly by the 70s and 80s. I thought, there was this tide, and this tide was moving over America. We were moving in the right direction. We were talking about the environment. We were talking about racial justice. We were dealing with people's sexuality and coming to terms with the fact that whatever you do is whatever you do. As long as no one's hurt, that's your business. I thought that, we were going to make real progress. We passed the Health Care Act. Deeply flawed as it might be, it brought health care to 20 million or 24 million people that didn't otherwise have it. And so it seemed like we're in a better place and getting into a better place. And then the last few months, it all seems to dissipate. And then the very worst elements, the kind of people that we thought we weren't going to see again, they've kind of raised their heads. So it's a tough time to govern. And whatever Washington does is going to make it harder to govern Montgomery County because we're going to lose resources, we're going to lose jobs, we're going to lose income. It's going to have a negative effect on property values. People are going to lose contracts, except probably Lockheed Martin, which may do very well. But Lockheed Martin isn't the backbone of this economy. Really, government workers are a huge part of our economy. So this is going to be a harder time to govern than anybody, I think, would have imagined. I want to tell three little stories about myself because I think more than any policy, you ought to understand where a person comes from and what their values are, why you make the decisions you do. So I want to talk first about growing up in Montgomery County. Went to my first demonstration in '61. It was an anti-war demonstration. I was like 12. I was at the March on Washington. I got to see King. I was like 13, whatever. And in that, I guess, 1962 or 63, I was at Montgomery Hills Junior High School, and they had a debate in the junior high school about civil rights, because civil rights was, the hottest topic in the country in the early 60s. And it was a pro and con debate, and the pro side was everything you would expect. I mean, the right arguments have always been the right arguments. But the con side was a statement that African Americans were subhumans, represented, a race or species that was, childlike and had to be cared for. This is 1963. When I was a school teacher, I would always remind my students of this, because if you want to understand race relations in America, you have to understand the particularly venomous nature of race in this country and the things that were done to people and the attitudes that were developed in people. And the kids that I went to school with, they didn't invent those stupid ideas by themselves. They got them from their parents. And their parents didn't invent those ideas. They got them from their parents. And this has been passed on for generation to generation. And I think about it now because I always think about the different fate that people had and how that attitude and that culture set a direction for one group of people and set a different direction for many of the rest of us. And so that's always affected me. Now fast forward to 1960, I think it's 69. I'm in El Paso, Texas. It's a National Student Association conference, going back and forth across the border at night to Juarez, Mexico, because the tequila was cheaper in Juarez. And I thought I was just crossing the border going to Mexico. And I got to say that it was one of the most shocking experiences in my life, because it was a completely different world. And between the cab drivers who wanted to drive you to prostitutes, which was bad enough, it was the little boy, probably 8 or 9 years old, with a little sister in tow, asking you if you wanted to buy his sister. And there's something about experiencing that. And then you put everything else you see in context. Because you don't sell children unless the rest of your life is for crap, unless the rest of the world is, you're without anything, any semblance of being able to take care of yourself. So I was pretty profoundly affected by that. And I'm walking across the bridge, and I stopped halfway across, and I looked down in the Rio Grande. And the Rio Grande is probably smaller than most of the creeks that run under the Purple Line at that point. And there's not much there. And I just had this realization that that river was a line. And the soil on both sides of the river is the same, the air on both sides is the same. Everything in the physical environment is the same, except I'm going back to an air-conditioned hotel with cars and in paved streets in a very different world, and I'm leaving a world that is nothing like this. And all that separates it is someone said, I'm drawing a line here, and this is your life, and this is my life. And that has always stuck with me. It's a painful thing to say. And I was, I think most of you know that I'm rather progressive. Some people would say somewhat left or whatever. But, it's one thing to be intellectually something. You read it in a book and you kind of, say, oh, this makes sense. It's another thing to see and feel and experience, because when things become real, then you know them. And I like to tell people that, once you see something, you can't not see it. Once you know something, you can't not know it. And I felt those things, were really seminal in my life. And the last thing is I worked in the food co-op in Montgomery, in Silver Spring. I was one of the founders, and we went to a conference in Minneapolis, and we met with some people from Acorn, and we were talking about political stuff, and they were bemoaning the fact that they had once again worked on somebody's campaign, and they provided the ground troops for this person's campaign. And when the person got elected, and when they went to him in January, he said, there are lots of interests I have to look out for. And their hearts just sunk, because they had put all this work thinking they were going to get somebody who was going to be their champion, and they discovered that they were just soldiers in his personal ambition train. And they were really disappointed. But what they said was, it's time that we start electing our own and stop electing people who we have to beg to do the right thing. And I took that very seriously. So after that, I went on, I ran for the city council in Tacoma Park. I served for 19 years. I was the champion of rent control in Tacoma Park. And for people who think about rent control and they think about New York, I invite you to go visit Tacoma Park, because we were a neighborhood that would have easily gentrified totally and completely, because we're right next to the metro. And rent stabilization allowed families who otherwise would have been booted out of that city to stay there. So what did it mean? It actually meant they got to go to Montgomery County schools, because they wouldn't have been booted out of Tacoma Park to someplace else in Montgomery County. Their journey would have been across the border into Prince George's County. And I used to tell my colleagues that you wouldn't send your kids to those schools, so why is it okay to get these people out of the community so they have to go to those schools? And I was arguing, I'd argue that $50 is actually a bag of groceries for people. And so these little things actually mean something to human beings. And I was really proud of that. And I thought that, other than the minimum wage, is probably the thing in my life that I'm proudest of having done politically, because I can look at my community every day and I can see the difference. So, I think a lot of you know me as an activist and as a county council member, and I try to remind people that I have not become part of the government. I have a government office. I go to work like everybody else goes to work. I am still a community activist. I still represent the side of the community that I came from. I didn't become an agent of the state. I'm not an apologist for what we do. I'm someone trying to get done what you all want government to do. And some people think we changed sides. I didn't change sides. I know where I came from, and I'm perfectly comfortable staying in that community. It means a lot to me to work for people on things that affect them every day. That's the most important thing I do. So I want to talk a little bit about what I want to do, because I've got a set of values, and I try to bring those values to bear in my decisions. We're in a county with a lot of challenges, and I'm fully appreciative of living in a county with the brain power that exists in Montgomery County and the resources that exist here. We can actually dream and imagine doing things that most other jurisdictions can't imagine doing. And that's a powerful thing. And it's also a terrible thing to waste. If you've got brains and resources and you don't use it right, shame on you. And I think we've got to figure out how to do a better job dealing with this. So my goals as county executive, and I'm going to go through 6 or 7 things pretty quickly. One is we've got to deal with our failure to address overcrowding in the schools and transportation. I was a school teacher for 17 years. I taught in one of the most impacted schools in the county. I can tell you the class size matters. It absolutely makes a difference. The difference between 22 kids or 17 kids and 28 and 29 kids, 30 kids is enormous. The amount of time, just do the math, the amount of time you have to spend with the kid answering questions, just divide your class size by a block of, say, 60 minutes for a math lesson and figure out how much time do you actually have to spend with somebody. So I believe that we have to address these issues seriously. And frankly, the only way we're going to pay for either transportation or schools if we make developers pay their fair share for things. They will not go broke. They will not go hungry. And the truth is, and I've told this to them before, you need a healthy business climate because you don't get resources to pay for the things you need to do if the business climate's unhealthy. If they don't make money, they don't pay taxes. If they don't pay taxes, I don't fund schools. It's that simple. So you need an environment where they can prosper, but you don't need an environment where they run over you. And that's just a flat out rule. And once when I was in front of one of the chamber groups, and I was introducing the bus rapid transit idea to him, one of the land use attorneys got up and said, our guys have looked at it and we think it makes sense. We just have 2 questions. Why are you doing it? And how are you going to screw us? And there was a combination of nervous laughter and dead silence. I think people were trying to figure out what I would actually say. And I said, look, I'm not going to screw you. It's like this. I need you to be as healthy as possible without running over the communities I represent, so you can make money, so I can bleed every dime out of you I can get. And it was, but that's the honest relationship between government and the business community. You keep them healthy, and then you figure out how much you can extract to do all the other stuff you need to do. I once told Mr. Lerner to think of me as his social investment director. I didn't want him to worry about all the good things he could do with his money, so I would take care of this for you. But I mean, I think there's an honesty in that, and some of them get that, and some of them don't. Some people still think if you can roll the council and you get the 5 votes, you can do whatever you want, and some people take a broader view. I like dealing with the people who take the longer view, but you're going to deal with everybody. So it's a big thing to me to deal with infrastructure and to make sure we get the resources to do this and that the communities get respected. And going along with that, we have got to bring the communities back into the planning process. This process that we have, is broken, and the planning department is little more than a real estate development wing of the development industry. All they talk about is how tall are the buildings and how much can you put here. And when you say, what about the schools, what about the parks, what about the transportation, it's like, well, we got to plan for that down the road. One of my colleagues who's running for executive likes to tell you that, you don't want to be in a place where there's no congestion, because that means nothing's happening. And, so the congestion's a sign of our success. And my response is, letting this place get out of hand, the congestion and school overcrowding is a sign of our failure to manage success. We could have let things happen here, and we could have managed it in a way that we didn't dig ourselves into this hole. And now we're in a hole and we got to dig out. So I want to bring the community back into it. I will find a way to get the community back into this process. It is absolutely critical that you become part. This is your community. The idea that you're going to be dead and have nothing to say about what's going to happen 30 or 40 years from now is just flat out wrong. And you invest in this community every bit as much as a developer invests. You put your lives here, you make this place vibrant, you make it alive. You deserve to be listened to. And I will see to it that people get listened to. Second thing we do, we have to figure out how to grow the economy. And real estate development doesn't mean you grow the economy. In Montgomery County right now, it's build a building here so you can empty out a building there. We paid Choice Hotel $4 million plus whatever Rockville gave them to empty out a building on Columbia Pike across from Trader Joe's so they could move to Rockville. We're giving Marriott $44 million with no promise of any new jobs to move from one place to another place. Economic development, if you look around you now, you got tons and tons of empty square footage. And it's small square footage. It's several thousand square feet in one or another office. It's a storefront in a shopping center. Soon it's going to be H.H. Gregg, by the way, in case you didn't see that. But there are all these places that are vacant. They're not going to be filled by large corporations. They're going to be filled, hopefully, by entrepreneurs that we can grow in Montgomery County. And I do think it's appropriate for the county to play a role in economic development and helping develop entrepreneurs and helping develop skills, because these people will build in the community and they will stay in the community. And that's important. I think small businesses, they produce most of the jobs in this country. It's time we act like it. We talk all we want about business and we figure out how do we fish for the biggest company in the world. We don't focus on what people need in their communities. We don't focus on the little people. So I would like to bring things back to that. Third thing, low wages and income inequality. We can do something about this. That was the whole point of the $15 an hour bill. And I am tired of people saying that flipping hamburgers isn't worth $15. If you support a family, it's damn well worth $15. People go to work every day to put food on the table, a roof over their heads, make sure if they've got kids, they can entertain them a little bit. God forbid they should go to a movie. And they should have a decent life. No one's expecting, somebody said, why don't you just pay them $100 an hour? Well, that's stupid. $15 an hour gets us close to a point where people can meet their basic needs. And if they meet their basic needs, it has implications for education, serious implications for education. Kids who grow up in poverty, they earn less money in a lifetime, they attain less educationally in a lifetime, they undergo emotional stress because their families are in emotional stress, they have more divorce, they have more trauma, they have all the things that make it hard for a kid to go to school the next day and pay attention in school. So it's not about a damn wage and it's not about a damn job, it's about the quality of life for a human being who has to go out and fulfill these basic needs. So that's why I'm going to keep pushing for 15 until Ike and Roger give it to me. And I'm going to lead a very difficult conversation about some kind of rent stabilization, because I've got to make it possible for people to stay here. And you would think that the business community would be vaguely interested in this because this is their workforce. They're the ones that don't pay squat to these retail jobs and these other jobs that force people to struggle to find housing. So anything we do to help it make it possible to stay here is going to make a stronger community. And it does make a difference. If people can live in their neighborhood and then don't think they're moving every year, they look at their neighborhood completely differently. Because if you're moving, you're not worried about the drug dealer, you're not worried about the crime, you just keep your head low, you stay out of the way, and you keep on moving until you move again and find another community. If you feel like this is your neighborhood like homeowners do, renters don't feel at all like a homeowner. You care about the trees on your block, you care about the speed of drainage of the water that goes down the sewer. There's all kinds of stuff you care about because it's your community. You say, hey, who are those people walking around here? You know, we're worried about what's going on. If you don't invest in your community, you don't invest in your neighborhood, you don't invest in your schools. If I can get people to the point where they feel like they can stay where they want to stay, put down roots and feel comfortable, their view of their communities becomes completely different. Because now they know they're going to be in that school, and their kids are going to be in that school, not for 1 year, but perhaps like I did in my neighborhood for almost the duration of my life. And the whole school system was mine, and the whole school system was my parents. And I want people to be able to have that experience. There's no reason why people who rent should have a different experience of life and connection to the community than people who own homes. And I guess wildly that most of you are of the homeowning class. So think about how important it is for you to own and have roots, and then think about what these people are missing by not owning and having roots. And so I'm going to fight for this stuff. Nobody likes it. My colleagues think this is poison, but I really do think we have to deal with it. And that leads to my fourth thing, which is the achievement gap. It is obscene that we've been talking about the achievement gap for as long as we've been talking about it in Montgomery County, and the numbers don't move. Somebody posted something the other day. They did some calculation on the rate of rise of closing the gap, and they said only 250 years will actually be able to close the gap. So I'm no fan of incrementalism. And some of you know me, I've been talking a lot about seeing the James Baldwin movie, I'm Not Your Negro, which I think is one of the most powerful movies I've ever seen, and we're working on doing a screening of it in Silver Spring. We're going to try to get the AFI said they want to do it with us. There's a scene in there, and I think they're talking to Malcolm X, and they're talking about, incrementalism, how people want us to be patient, and they want us to wait. And she says something like, I think it's him, something to the effect of, they want us to wait another 40 years. Well, this is 50 years past that movie. We didn't even get here in 40 years. There's not any sign that we would necessarily get there in another 40 years, unless we are willing to deal with racism, confront these demons in our own front yard and backyard, and come to terms with it. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but we have to have this conversation. Otherwise, nothing is going to change. We will be a county like the nation of two different people in two different communities. And I don't think most people actually want that to be the way things are. And so we need to proactively do something about that. And so, when you get into issues like racial justice and, fairness, you got to think about, Debbie mentioned the Farm Road community. Here's, Black historic community created after the Civil War in Ashton, Olney, Sandy Spring. Some developer comes along, draws a map accidentally or not, takes a road off the map. It wasn't much of a road, it was a gravel road. But it was enough of a road that you had an address, and if you wanted to build on your property, you could build on your property and you could fix it. And he takes it off, and Park and Planning has fought this community for probably 12 years now. Dale, we've been in it 10? 9?
We've been in it 10.
Yeah, 10 years. I can't get them to put a goddamn line back on the map. And that line exists in other county maps. I don't even have to invent it. There's a surveyor, every deed on the property says it binds on either the east or west side of Farm Road. So there's a road there. And I can't get Park and Planning to acknowledge it. And so more recently, we've got these folks in this community near Westbard. They have a church, they had a cemetery. The cemetery got buried. They want recognition. They don't want another building put on top of it until they know whether the remains there and know what it is. But they also want some recognition of the historic Black community that was over there. I'm stunned. I blame myself partly. I have no idea how many different communities there were that were historic Black communities in Montgomery County that are lost, and they're lost without a trace. There's no record of them. They're not in Maryland history. They're not in Montgomery County history. When we did, I think, is David Rottenstein here? And he does this amazing stuff on race in Montgomery County. And when we did the historic stuff designation of things in Silver Spring and put all these markers out, they're markers for buildings. They're not markers for people. And there were people here. And so we've got to figure out how to reintegrate this stuff and bring it back into our life, because it is part of our life. And I know something about my history, and it shouldn't be that one group of people are kind of singled out to have their history obliterated and pretend like they weren't there. And somebody put it, I thought, really well. I'll paraphrase, but it's basically like, we were good enough to dig the ditches and build the roads, but we're not good enough to be remembered. And I think that's a shame, and we owe it to people to do something about that. So. let's say something quickly about immigration and what's going on. This county, one of the best parts about Montgomery County, except for the crap going on today and the blips on the radar, is this is generally a really welcoming community. And we have gone a long way to accept people from other countries and other cultures and come in here and let them make a home. We work to try to provide English classes. We put their kids in schools. We understand that the path to becoming an American is the same path of every immigrant that's ever been in this country. You come here, you settle, you get an education, and you become part of the community. And we need to do a better job. And we have a battle of resources. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to get the resources to do this. But it was very depressing when we talked to the people who do the language programs in the county and to talk about the reach of the language programs. And the language programs, the number of people they reach is in the single digit thousands. The number of people who need language help is probably close to 30,000. So we've got to figure out how we do more. You can't complain about people not integrating in if you do not have the tools to integrate them in. So hopefully we'll be taking more steps and we'll do the things we need to do. And we've got to do something about this hate speech. You can't outlaw it. And this issue with the policeman is going to be a real challenge because he's going to argue that what he puts on his Facebook page is his free speech. And we've got to figure out how do we deal with this and how do people come to understand that even if you're free to say something, you don't say everything you think. Some things are inappropriate, some things make it harder to do your job. We've got challenges, but we've got to stand up and meet those challenges. I think the county's on the right side of the law in terms of how we've handled immigrants in this county. We will make sure that people with criminal records, particularly violence, that they don't stay here. But we're not looking for the Jean Valjeans of the world and saying if you're hungry and you do something, or if you're homeless and you do something, that's a reason to get rid of you. We've got to figure out how we do this. We've tried to separate that, and I think we're going to continue. There's not a person on the council who wants to go to a different place. And I certainly don't want to go to a different place. So it's going to be an ongoing struggle. And we're going to have to keep working with all our neighbors to make sure that they're understanding of where we're going. The last thing I want to tackle is environmental issues. We have laudable goals. We don't always meet the goals we set. I have been chided by more than one environmental group saying that, you say you're going to do this, that's your policy, your reality doesn't match your policy. And I believe we have to work harder to match the policy, and we've got to look for opportunities. We just built a courthouse with a south-facing wall and not a tree in sight and not a solar panel on the wall. And how we didn't put it out to an architect who understands solar and say, dude, I got 110 feet in the air and it's all exposed on the south to the sun. Could you hang something here? We didn't do it, and that's got to stop. We have to take an approach that we actually take the environment serious. I mean, I'll say that, if we really screw up the environment as much as it looks like we're intent on doing, almost none of this stuff may not even matter. If you wrecked the planet, all this other stuff may well become trivial because that affects our lives in a way that's so profound that I think it's going to make our heads spin. And I don't want to leave my grandkids a world like that. I don't want to leave my kid. I think my daughter's over there somewhere. She's not going anywhere soon. I want to make sure she doesn't go into her later years and have to face an environment that's wildly out of control. So I think we've got to do a better job, and I'm willing to take the lead. So as a county executive, you're not a legislator. I have to give up my legislative roles. I don't get to pass bills, but I do get to introduce bills, number one. And you can guarantee that I'll be introducing things that move us forward. Second, you get to speak out and lead. And you get out in front of a parade. And you get to talk to the community. And some of you who've worked with me in the community know that I just don't sit there as a council member and say, that's nice, I'll vote for you. I will help you organize. I've done this before. I have experience in organizing. And I see myself as helping people find a voice and figure out how to express and how to fight. Because fighting isn't necessarily natural for everybody. I talk to people all the time and say, you're going to have to not be nice. You're going to have to say hard things to people. That's true. You're dealing in a hard world, and you got to be willing to say hard things to people. So I'm going to be there, not just as somebody who sits down and says, if they pass this, I'll sign it. I'm going to be working to get things passed, so I've got things to sign that I feel good about, and I think that you are going to feel good about. The last thing is, we've got to deal with the money issue. I understand fully that we have limited resources, and we're not going to tax our way out of the problem. This county will not tolerate, my sense is very strong on this, they're not tolerating massive tax increases for whatever major good thing I might concoct or you might ask me to concoct. So you got to look at your existing resources. I've been around government long enough, when I was in Tacoma Park and here, to have a pretty clear sense that we don't spend everything the way we should spend it, that we are not organized as efficiently as we could be organized. We make choices that are not necessarily, I don't think, fiscally prudent for us, and I think we can do a better job. And I've talked to my friends in labor, and this is, everybody knows this is not sustainable. My friends in labor know this is not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, you face, if you don't change what you're doing, you're just simply going to spend more money doing what you do. You're going to wind up laying off people. You're going to wind up cutting back services because you feel your hands are tied. We've got to untie our hands. We have got to look at the way we put government together and ask ourselves, are there other ways to do it? Is there a value in looking at worker teams and other forms of management? There are managers who've got a span of control of 2 and managers with a span of control of 40. When I was first on the council, we had approved 3 people for park and planning, 2 workers and a supervisor. I didn't think much of it the first year. The second year they came back, they filled the worker positions. They didn't fill the supervisor position. They wanted the supervisor position. So I said to them, I said, so did these people get their job done? They said, yeah. I said, were they supervised? They said, yeah. I said, who supervised them? Well, we had another manager, and this other manager took them on and supervised them. I said, did that manager, was he able to do his other job? And they said, yes. I said, did that manager have to work overtime to supervise both groups? They said no. I said, well, you obviously solved your problem. Why are you coming back and asking me for money? And it's true. I wouldn't sign off on another supervisor because they had showed that they could make the system work without another supervisor. Well, that's not the only example of this in county government. And so it sits on the management side. We've got issues in procurement. We spend way too much for things. I mean, my first experience in the office, I wanted a monitor bigger than my laptop. So I looking in the paper, and I can go down to Office Depot. I can buy a monitor for $99. So I say, okay, can I get authorized to go buy a monitor for $99? No. You have to buy it through the county contract because we get the best prices through the county contract, and so you have to make your purchase there. That monitor through the county contract was $149. I said, what do I have to do to get the monitor and not spend the $149? They said, go down and buy it yourself and we'll reimburse you. So I went down and bought it myself and got reimbursed. You cannot have departments where you can't look and find things on sale and not buy them. I sat when they were procuring radios, and I Googled the radio they were buying with the specs they had, and I'm like, why am I finding it for less if I want to buy one online than what's in this deal that you guys have put in front of us? I want that attitude in county government. I want to find people who are going to take that attitude to county government. I want to be able to do childcare. I want to get below 4-year-olds. I've got to find the money to do it. So I need people who are going to take apart the county budget, look at ways for us to do things better, find savings so that you can use your existing resources to continue to do the things you need to do. I'm not doing this because I'm going to promise anybody a tax cut. I got too much stuff to do. There are too many kids who don't get proper child care and a proper education. But I can do this, I believe, without having to make the burden on everybody in the county greater. And I'm going to work really hard to do this. And our procurement, I think Karen Roper's here today. So she was at the lovely meeting with businesses that have had a terrible time in Silver Spring because the county sold a bunch of land for a garage, for an apartment building, which the land was a parking lot, and these people lost their parking. They lost delivery access. They wanted signs. It was 2 months to get signs. 2 months to get a sign that says parking with an arrow on it. But that's out of our own sign shop. But the best part was the sign cost $1,000. And nobody wanted to spend $32,000 on 32 signs. And I'm like, why don't they go to Signorama in Silver Spring, where I can get the sign the next day and pay a fraction of the price? That would never occur to anybody, and they would not be able to make that procurement. And something is wrong with that system. And the best part was the guy tells me at the end, he says, you think that's bad? So you see, the meters we have with the solar things on top now? So if the meter goes out of service, they have a plastic bag that goes over it and you pull the string tight. That bag costs, come on, take a guess. Oh, you're high. $250. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yes, seriously. So anybody doesn't think you can't make this place run better and more efficiently is wrong. And I don't believe I can go out and ask people in good faith for more money until I can demonstrate that I'm spending everything you give me in the most efficient way possible. I am not a fiscal conservative, but I'm fiscally responsible. And I understand money is a precious resource. If it's precious to government, it's sure precious to you. And I have a responsibility to be a steward of that money. And I can promise you that if I can enact an agenda, I'm going to be looking every way I can to make sure we do it within the constraints that we have. I think it's important that we get this work done. Because if we don't get this work done, we're going to have a hard time maintaining the county and the county we like. So I feel compelled to try to figure out how to work my way through this. So I guess I've said much of what I want to say. I said I would give people chances to ask me questions. I just am really grateful that everybody's here. I want to shout out a particular friend of mine who probably kept me out of all kinds of trouble, Joe Monte, who was my high school counselor. Mr. Monte, during my formative years of 65 to 67, dealt with my charming, total respect for the older generation, my perspective that everything they knew was wrong, and that I had nothing to learn from them. And he endured and was, a good voice of counsel and probably interceded with the administration at least once. And I'm really appreciative of that. And I'm appreciative of all the rest of my friends who are here, my staff, which is just absolutely amazing. Dale, Debbie, please stand up. Tiffany, Claire, who else is here? Mara, I see Mara over there. So you guys have been amazing. And the work I do in my office is only possible because of my staff. I get deeply into the weeds on lots of things, but the people who help doing the dig are the people who work on my staff. My staff has, I think, a lot of freedom, and my philosophy is if you hire brains, you ought to pay attention to them. So my staff is allowed to tell me I'm wrong. There's no penalty for telling me I'm wrong, and they're allowed to change my mind because there is no point in having people around you if all they're going to do is be your servants. That is not the way to treat the people you work with. I don't do it with my staff. I'm sure not going to use the county government that way. I want people thinking, I want ideas, I want to be challenged, and I want to be in a partnership. I want to change the relationship of the executive and the county council. I want to talk about our budget, not that the executive sent over his budget and now it's the council's budget. A county budget ought to be everybody in the county's budget. So I want to set forth a cooperative path forward with people in the community and people in the county government. I want to make sure this works for you. And I promise you, I will not disappoint you. No money from developers, even now. When somebody tells you they're doing public financing, but they're taking money from the developer, remember this. Land use attorneys typically gave $150 to $250, an occasional $500. Any land use attorney who gives us $150, your matching funds will turn it into $750. So we need to pass on the developer money still. And so I'm still not taking it from developers and still not taking it from land use attorneys. That's not the way you do public financing. Public means public. It doesn't mean these private interests. So I'm staying away from that. And lastly, be aware of PACs. There's a PAC out there called Empower Montgomery. It is funded by developers. The leading actors in the PAC are developers and land use people. Do not be confused. Their literature will be beautiful. They will be for great schools and a great community and great transportation. They just don't tell you how they're going to pay for it. But they're going to elect great people who will get this done. In my experience in Montgomery County and your experience in Montgomery County, we wouldn't be here. We say we're going to do things, we do not do them. We tell you there's no problem in schools, there's a problem in schools. We tell you the traffic's manageable, ain't so manageable. So watch for the PACs. Find out about a PAC before you support a PAC. Pay attention. There's a lot of money at stake in this race. And it's going to be your money, particularly if the wrong people get in there. So stay awake, stay alert, and thank you all, and I look forward to working with you.